like Erebus. That's the only thing that's available to a lot of these things, so that's what they're using. That's not a specific relationship, and it doesn't form a specific community, all right? So we're not going to really talk about them. Nettles, I love nettles. I find out you can eat them, you know, and I love eating them, as a matter of fact. I've never had a problem with getting stung. Somebody told me I was going to sting myself, but I always took them like greens, right? And so they're wonderful plants, and they support 4 butterflies, but those 4 butterflies are part, it's in a way, guild-like, because you look for nettles, you look for those butterflies associated with it. So in a sense, it could be considered a guild plant. I'm just kind of like, I'm not in love with it, you know? I'm gonna like, nah, it's a quasi-guild. And what happened is that I was preparing this as often when I prepare presentations for WABA. I learned all the things that I didn't know about, you know, like guilds and or, you know, keying butterflies and or anything else I happen to be talking about. And so like I was forced to make a decision about the nettle, and I just said, you know, everybody, can you name the 4 butterflies that use this plant?
Miller's tortoiseshell, red admiral,
Admiral?
common,
Yeah, Sadler's, yeah. There's one more that you probably missed.
Tortoiseshell, does somebody say tortoiseshell?
No. Vanessa Annabella, West Coast lady. People don't realize that it is one of those that uses, you know, nettles as well. Yeah?
I also heard Gardui use it on occasion.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised they eat lupus for everything. Right? So, the reason I exclude them, well, this is a hard one to exclude, but if it's a guild plant, then you'll forgive me, you can accept it, and that's fine. The relationships of non-guild food plants that have large butterfly utility at one time or another, in one place or another, is that these relationships are mostly opportunistic, and they shift irregularly in ways that are not predictable. Therefore, they don't have that component of like, you know, a community, and it's not. And then, of course, some of these guild plants that we will describe, not every one of the plants that butterflies that use those plants is going to be associated with that plant at every site. So, like, it's kind of like you have to give some leeway here. But it was hard for me to exclude. It was hard for me to include nettles. And then the other group is legumes. Now, we do have some legumes that we consider guild food plants. In fact, they're very important, and you'll love them. They're great. You know, the alfalfa is a plant that almost anything that eats Fabaceae will eat, and since it's an invasive and or agricultural plant, it has served as a host for a lot of butterfly species. But again, because of its you know, quasi-serendipitous nature, its utility is not going to make it a guild. And you know, there's a lot of sulfurs, blues, and hair streaks that use leguminous plants, and we'll see some legumes that are guild plants, but we'll get to them in a minute. All right, so well, maybe I need to talk some more before I show you that picture, because that's one of my favorite pictures. Several points need to be made before we go too far. I kind of ignored grasses. Now, I got to tell you, and the reason I ignored grasses is because of my lack of understanding. I couldn't identify most grasses unless there was like Phragmites or the Russian ryegrass, Elamus, you know, the ones that everyone knows, maybe some Festucas and stuff like that. And it's my impression, likely, that Festuca idahoensis is actually a plant that supports 5 to 6 different butterfly species, sometimes in the same habitat, right? So, like, I just said, hey, you know, I can't talk about something I don't know about. Well, no, I can, but I'm not going to tonight. And then Washington butterfly larvae. This is not true, for instance, of Virginia butterfly larvae, because they have a carnivorous butterfly in Virginia. We have some that are occasionally cannibals, all right, but I don't consider that legitimate carnivory. Did I say thanks for all showing up?
Yes.
Yeah, you can say it, yeah.
All right. Yeah, thanks, man. I've seen some faces here I haven't for a while. It's good, really good to see Bill. Huh? So, okay. Anyway, so given that we don't have any carnivorous butterflies, our butterflies can be divided into 2 basic groups. And this is important because those that are leaf feeders are actually tied to the plant whose leaves they're eating. Those who are fruit and flower feeders, they're like capricious, okay? An example of one of those is our azures, okay? Azures need fruits and or flowers, usually flowers and then fruits in that sequence, and really are pretty broad in their tastes. You know, azures will eat a whole bunch of different plants and different families, and it doesn't make too much sense. Gray hair streaks are the same way. So actually, for a lot of these gill plants that we're talking about tonight, you can throw in azure or the gray hair streak to most of them and say, okay, well, they'll do just fine, right? So that does make a difference. If something's bound to a plant because it has a preference for that plant family, then it's different to an organism that's bound to that plant because it's got juicy flowers and fruit, and that's the only limitation. Okay, so and I mentioned earlier that a gill plant can serve many different purposes, and I'm glad that the point came up when I said support. I was actually implying all of this. I'm glad I get the chance to actually elucidate it now, or eliminate it. I don't know which. A mate location. An instance of where a plant serves as a mate location, a good one is Salix exigua, the coyote willow, which is where the white hair streaks in Kittitas Valley. Anybody here seen those white hair streaks? Okay, well, they perch on those plants, and that's where they look for mates. Now, the fact that they're perching on those plants is probably, actually related to the fact that they use them as a food plant as well, because California hair streaks perch on their food plant as well, and it's also like the largest shrub in the vicinity, so it kind of serves as a landmark. Its mate location is very important. If the plant that is your food plant and mate locator, that's a useful thing, and it is another aspect of support. Another one is the nectar. Huh?
White hair streak. Doesn't ring a bell.
It's a white silver hair streak.
White silver?
You don't have a bell.
Silver.
Sylvan?
Yeah, silver hair streak. That's right.
Sylvan.
Yeah,
Yes.
I didn't say that.
No.
If I have to do that 3 times, you're going to have to carry me out of it. All right, nectar resource. Okay, so if the plant is, also fed on by the butterflies whose larvae feed on it, they nectar on that plant. Then it's a nectar source and it's a larval food plant resource. And a good example of that is Ceanothus velutinus, deer brush. I think is it deer brush? Snow brush. Whatever. Yeah.
Well, you kind of snow brush. I know it as.
Right. So that's also useful. If the plant that you're feeding on also provides the adult's nectar, that means that the tight association of those, the plant and the butterflies is further enhanced. And then, of course, there's those that do both. Okay, so how many people know the northern buckwheat, Eriogonum compositum? Okay, that's a plant that shows this all the time. Almost anytime you're any place where you see lichenids, sitting on these northern buckwheats, they're nectaring on them, they're mate locating on them, and their larvae are eating them. So like this is a really tightly bound association, and it's profound, in fact, how tightly bound that is. Now, how many people know that Gnome, our newsletter, is basically a corruption of Gnome? Eriogonum. All right. How many know the story? Okay, well then, someday you can tell that story. I can't tell you because I'm the culprit. Okay, so now this next plant is, this is like one of my favorite plants. I want somebody to pronounce the genus name. Is it still this name?
Yes.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Sphaeralcea, munroana. It's it has a very original name, Monroe's globe mallow. The reason this is important to me is that I was well into my butterfly career before I even knew it existed. It lives in like some of the hottest places in the Columbia Basin, and it's a glorious plant, as you can kind of see. I mean, this is a wonderful creature to come across in habitat that otherwise is pretty desolate. And then this one here, you've probably all seen it, Malva parviflora. You guys recognize that? It's kind of a cheese weed. I'm not sure where the cheese came in, but it's the weed part I got.
It's the seed heads that will wheel the cheese.
Ah, yeah, that's good having a botanist. It's really good. All right, and you've all seen these. These sometimes occur in Seattle, all right? And then I like this as a nice name too, lliamna rivularis. it kind of calms the soil. All right, forget it. But now these three plants support three butterfly species. It's definitely a guild, but it's a reverse guild. Most of the time you define a single plant species supporting a group of butterflies. So I had to put this at the beginning. It's like, that's a little caveat. This is one of them. This is another one. You know what that one is? Common checkered skipper. And then that's the...
Heliopedes.
well, I know Heliopedes. Come on, what's the common name?
Northern white.
Yeah, way to go. And these butterflies, I mean, people that are looking out in the desert will come upon, you know, especially this glorious plant. When I first saw it, I was walking from one canyon to another canyon over kind of a dry tableland area with sagebrush, and the only thing flying around was like these nasty old grasshoppers and you know, cicadas were kind of buzzing. It was like, I was quick to want to get to this other place, and then off to my side, I saw something in the distance. It was like somebody dropped something that's orange, you know, and I walk over, it's like this plant. Next thing I know, it's like everywhere. There's these plants everywhere. Every single one of them had larvae of all three of these species on them, all right? It was like, holy cow. And this repeated itself over and over again. So how many people have actually seen this plant? Well, that's a surprisingly large number, all right? So you know how glorious it is. It's a cool plant. So in this case, these three species.
What's that butterfly in that first one?
That one there? Come on.
The American lady?
No.
It's not a painted lady, is it?
No.
West Coast?
There you go.
There you go. Wow.
If you just said admirable, that's the only one of the genus, then I'd have another head slap and you would be carrying it.
I've never seen this one.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Oh. Well, that's what they look like.
Thank you.
This year, we had relatively good numbers.
Yes, yes. That's because people are planting more mallows in their gardens, which is real key. I grew up at a time when Seattle had hollyhocks everywhere. These butterflies were everywhere, but hollyhocks have since become kind of dowdy weeds, and they don't like them. Okay, so now, anybody know what this is? Bear. Yeah. Uva-ursi, by the way, is bear. Yeah, you're right. Uva means egg, ursi means bear, egg, berry, and bear. This has a nice assortment of butterflies on it, and these are two. They're both alphas.
Brown
Yeah, and then the Echo Azure and Beloria Freya, Freya's fritillary. Okay, now the Freya fritillary is not one that you're likely to come across too much, but this association, whether it's the Echo Azure or some other azure, is common all across North America. If you go from Newfoundland to Alaska, and you find bearberries, you're going to find three of these species the same. Now, the echo species will vary, but they're still, those three. So this is definitely a guild plant. Not a lot of butterfly species on it, but this is a case where here's two alphas on this plant. One is a fruit feeder, that's the brown alpha, that eats the flowers and the fruit, and then the hoary alpha eats the leaves. So this is it's nice. It's nice to have a plant that you see so commonly too. Now that's not that everywhere you go where there's bearberry you're going to see this association, but very frequently you will. You guys know this one, right? Purshia tridentata, that's antelope brush. Again, yeah.
Were you going to mention bearberry's association with moths?
Moths?
Yes.
They don't exist in my life. I don't even know what a moth is. 46 years and you asked that question. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So John, back to the connecticut. So connecticut grows on this side of the mountains, but do you get all those species of butterflies on this side of the mountains?
Well, you don't get Freya, but you get all the other two. Freya is one that's very rare in this state, and so the only reason I actually threw it in there is because of its absolute association over a large part of boreal America. And it uses other plants as well, so it's capable. But this association, like when I was in the Yukon, you walked into habitats and there was this association. You see all all these butterflies just in the immediate vicinity. So it was, it's widespread, it's reported, across the globe. I didn't think about it immediately when I thought gill plants. So when I started looking at it, like, well, man, that's just, it's an ecological association. It's pretty tight, the plant is partitioned by flower feeders and leaf feeders, and it's widely geographic, and geographic spread is pretty broad. So yeah, it's worth consideration at least, But you realize, of course, I'm working up. These are the smalls. We're gonna get to the good stuff coming up, right? Well, maybe not. So Purshia, another plant that only has a few butterflies associated with it, but it's so tight. Those tight associations are always interesting to me. One of them is the bear's hair streak, okay? The other is the California hair streak, which also uses, deer brush. So it's like, these butterflies can use other plants, but their association with this one, like Purshia, is used by California hair streaks in places where its other food plant isn't, like, the lower, step riparian interface. And then, oh, I forgot.
One point to make on those two.
Yeah?
So the Ceanothus and the Purshia they're in different families of plants. They're in the same order, but different families.
Right.
The interesting thing about them is that they have the same symbiotic bacteria on the roots. And it's fairly rare symbiotic bacteria association.
You just made that.
They are both branchiosymbionts.
Man, no, seriously, that's amazing. So does the chemical relationship actually penetrate through the rest of the plant?
You tell me.
No, I didn't even know about it until now. That is amazing. I'm telling you, look at the talent we have in this room. It's pretty amazing. The other here is the gray hair streak and the brown elephant, both of which use other plants. Like I said, the gray hair streak is just like, it lacks faith, okay? It eats flowers and fruits of nearly anything, and that's to its great advantage. There's a butterfly that all the other members of its genus, which is the genus Strymon, exists south of the border or deep into the American Southwest. They're just like really a tropical butterfly. And so this butterfly, because of this particular ability, I think, has managed to move up into our area and exploit the resources. The brown elephant, not so much. But again, it's pretty widely spread. So there's 4 butterflies that are basically tied to that plant. Man, that is bizarre. Bacteria?
Branchio.
Okay, we talked about coyote willow. I've heard it called wolf willow. Have anybody heard it called wolf willow? I'm getting... All right. This is actually a pretty cool plant too, and the reason it is it supports an awful lot of butterflies over a huge area. One butterfly that it supports is a tiger swallowtail, western tiger swallowtail, and that's not really like a big deal because it eats willows of any sort, okay? But it can use this willow in places where it normally, like out in the Columbia Basin, it doesn't have many other willows to use it. It preferentially uses this willow, which is also true of the mourning cloaks, Limonitis archibus, the viceroy, and Norquins, right? So in places where there are a number of willows available, those species will preferentially use this species of willow. So there is a tie there. Now, as to whether there's a bacteria using the roots or a drug relationship or Russian spies, I don't know, but it is definitely tied together. Now, it's also used by the silver hair streak, whether they're in Kittitas County or in Lincoln County or Spokane County. There's a lady in the Washington Butterfly Association Spokane chapter that sent me images of a butterfly from Lincoln County, and it was silver hair streak. It wasn't like the ones in Kittitas that are real pale. It's one of the darker ones, and it was perched on this willow, and it was like, oh, Salix exigua, the coyote willow. And it's a lot of people like. That's how I usually see them. You can spot them by the side of the road because they've got this kind of hoary aspect to them. Anybody ever seen these things like that? Right, right.
Sometimes that's separated out as a separate species.
Sometimes botanists are really useful. Other times.
Keep it up.
All right. And there, of course, are the I'll throw these out. There's our Sylvan hair streak. Now, isn't that a wonderful thing? It's like, if you had to describe that, you would describe it by all the things it doesn't have.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't have spots, it doesn't have color. You know, it's like, whoa, it's kind of remarkable for its lack of, and it's located in one very, very small place. It's probably a human artifact. When they started irrigating Ceanothus Valley, the willow grew up in all the places that irrigation leaked. And so it's probably less than 100 years old. Because you don't have to go very far to get into, silver hair streaks that are really very different, So like, and it's tied to this plant, absolutely. You can go anywhere you want and look on any other willow you want, and you're just out of luck. Now, if you get up into the mountains, you run into sylvans that will use other willows, but I'm almost certain that's because this willow isn't up there. So, let's see, did I miss any that uses it? No. Oh, Nymphalis. Antiopa, the morning cloak. There's a butterfly that has explosive occurrences. And those of us who went to the Golden Dale conference, saw massive infestations of larvae on this willow very, very frequently in the Columbia Basin. That's the willow that they're using, is this wolf willow. So once you learn to recognize this willow, you will be able to go and see it because, well, maybe not, because the frosty ones are another species. You're killing me. But, and this is one of my favorite caterpillars. I would like to say that looks like a piece of...
You can say it.
But it actually looks like some other things too, right? But anyway, you look at it, it doesn't look really good to eat, right? And this is, of course, that doesn't look good to eat either, the spines. How many of you reared some of the monarchs, or the morning cloaks? Okay, was that cool or what? I mean, those larvae are amazing, but when they pupate, huh?
The larvae were caught out here about 40 years ago.
Right out here.
Yeah, 40 years ago, before that was illegal.
And then this, of course, is the viceroy, which is, always there to remind us that butterflies lie to us. And anyone who says that nature is not deceptive just isn't paying attention. I mean, between a viceroy that looks like a butterfly, it's not even closely related to, has a larva that looks like a piece of, that's deception on the wing and on the leaf. So, right, I'm done. Now we get into some of the, I was talking about legumes. This is like one of my favorite plants, and it's actually, I'm going to show you the plants all together, and then we'll look at the butterflies that use them. Now, this is a remarkable plant, Lotus crassifolius. I don't know what, deer vetch, big deer vetch, is that about right?
Again, this has been split into two species, but in Washington it's almost all one. We're calling it the rosy deer vetch.
The rosy. The sweet. You got a mouse in your pocket?
No.
Is this American ITIS? Man, I've got to learn so much. Now, I should vet you first, and I have to go through
It'll be in the new flora of the herbarium.
All right.
This coming year.
So what is the common name?
Big rosy deer vetch.
Yeah.
Rosy deer vetch.
Well, there's another species that has brown flowers.
Brown flowers?
Yeah. It's rare in Washington. You find it more commonly in Oregon, California.
All right. Well, this is a plant you'll see like over the Kitsap Peninsula and a number of places in the Hood Canal region. It's really a remarkable plant. It grows in places that have recently been burned. So you go places that have been burned in 2 to 3 years or heavily logged and trashed. Ivy took us to a place one time that was horrible to look at. I mean, tree stumps uprooted. It was just, 2 years later, man, there were brown hair streaks everywhere because that's what they feed on, right? So, and then this is, now see, I changed the name. This used to be Lotus. Is it still Acmispon?
Yeah, it's been put in Acmispon. The previous one was put in Hosacea.
Hosacea.
It's Hosacea or Rosina.
This one's
This one's
Acmispon. This is right, though, right?
Sure. That was a weird picture. So I can't verify nevadensis for sure.
Well, I got this off the web. They all said it was the same thing. So
I'll agree with the web.
All right, but anyway, these two were one time in one genus. There's certain aspects about them that are really different, so I can sort of understand why they've been placed in different genera now, but they're both legumes, and the list of species between them, they're almost all the same east and west, right? That includes the silver-spotted skipper, includes northern cloudy wing, the Pursia's dusky wing, that's the Pursia's larva underneath. I put that under because that's just cool. That is a cool one. That's just retreat. You can see the little web, the little strands of silk that kind of close the leaf over, and it kind of sits in there all cozy and nice. You can actually find them pretty easy on account of the fact that they sew these little retreats together and they look really obvious. Same thing is true for the silver-spotted skipper. So then you have the green hair streak. Now, the one on top is the green hair streak that's found over in the Kitsap Peninsula area. One on the bottom is the one that's, like I said, is passed. On that same trip to Goldendale, we saw those on that Ski Lodge Road. All right, so so far, basically the same species, maybe different subspecies. Silvery blues in both places. Now, the Melissa's blue, the one there in the lower right, is only found in the Salish Pass area. But it's very interesting, and I'll get to that in a second. And then the gray hair streak in both places. So that's a lot of butterflies. And they're the same ones, excluding the Melissa blue found only in eastern Washington. So that association of those species with these two plants is really firm, and it's predictable, and you can really you can look forward to it. You can almost expect it. Now they don't always fly on the same day, so like their life cycles can be spread out over time. But if you're familiar, or it's a place you visit often enough, you'll see them over the course of the season. Now, the Melissa blue that I just showed you turns out to be really interesting because its use of this particular plant is in a place where it normally doesn't occur. It's at almost 4,000 feet in the Simcoe Mountains, and it's not hard to figure out where it came from because you don't go very far before you find populations down low in the agro areas on either side. Down by Goldendale or down by Wapato. But where it's using this plant, let's say it's passed, it's a single brooded animal. It is, has one brood a year, so it has really adapted to this particular plant. And when you think about it, look at that, that's kind of juicy. It stays for a long time. It's not like, doesn't look like it's really durable, but I can say for this one, for sure, you go out hunting green hair streaks in the spring, you won't hardly see these plant forms. They're just coming up. You go out looking for silver-spotted skippers later in the summer. These things are growing all over it. They kind of climb a little bit, so they're really massive. So they're really pretty durable plants and really pretty juicy. All right. So these two plants, I would advise anyone who becomes familiar with those plants that they can look for these species, and most of the time won't be disappointed. It's kind of an exciting thing about guild plants is that they often bring their associates with them along the way. Okay, now we get into the gnomes, and I just decided that I wasn't going to try to explain all the relationships, in figures. It's just like it's hard because Eriogonums are an amazing plant in that they support so many, mostly lichenids. Okay, now everyone knows what lichenids are, right? They also support metal marks, which some people would consider lichenids. They're at least lichenid-like. And in this particular case, this is sphaerocephalum. And I would say roundhead is what that literally translates. Would you say sphaerocephalum is spear-shaped, spear-headed? Right. And that plant, that image certainly shows it, all right? This is Eriogonum compositum, the northern buckwheat. And we'll go back over these. That's another white flower variety. The main reason I wanted to look at that. That's like those flower heads, okay? A lot of the lichenids that use buckwheats eat the flower heads. Now, if you look at those flower heads, that's pretty yummy. Those are big, juicy, like, whoa. And you can see that the plants themselves are fairly robust. I mean, that's not a bad way to go if you're going to target a plant species that you want to get cozy with, right? And then heracleoides, which has something to do with Hercules. And it has also pale varieties. And they have different growth forms, but now I picked these three because they kind of show how you can be confused by the same plant a little bit. But this is the key that pretty much gives them away. When you see that little rosette of leaves, you know, halfway up the flowering stem, you pretty much know it's heracleoides. Isn't that right, Dave? These are
Yeah, they look like lupins almost.
yeah. So, and then elatum, and that's tall buckwheat. Now this is a picture of the whole plant, and if you notice, there's two things about it. Now, one is the flowers are like, all the things that we looked at before had big monster flowers, right? Yum, yum, yum. These don't. And you look at them, they're like little. Right? So what makes them useful? Well, there's that, those big old leaves, right? There's a secret. And these plants live and bloom a long time. In Lower Recent Creek, they start blooming at the end of June. And I can document that this year, in late June, and well, certainly all through the, when was our field trip? That was in July, right? Yeah. And it was like, they were aplenty in July. September, early September, and we're still there. And the Mormon meadowlarks were happy to be nectaring upon them. So they have,
Because they were still blooming on the 11th of September. When we were
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So longevity, that's like really important too. Remember I mentioned some of the things about what makes a good food plant. Durable and or persistent. And or, in this case, not luxuriant. Okay, well, for at least the ones that feed on the flower heads. Now, the important thing to understand about feeding on a flower head is that the butterflies that use this plant do feed on the flower heads, but it's risky business because they can't get enough nourishment just from feeding on those pitiful things, right? So they eat what they can and they crawl down the stem and they crawl up the stem to the next one, all right? Now, if you're a caterpillar, that's not the kind of thing you want to do because you're exposing yourself to a little bit of risk, okay? Now, if you can sit right in the head of one of those northern buckwheats and just, you know, have all the flowers you want right around you and never have to do anything, then you're pretty secure. But there's a kind of a caveat here, all right? And that is that all of these plants, all these lichenids are tended by ants, okay? And they're tended by ants because they have drug properties. No, they have, they smell like the queen. No, it's drugs, I'm telling you. If you watch them, they tap, they do all this stuff, and a little teeny drop comes out. And the ants are like, whoa! And they go crazy, they run up and down. It's like, for that little, you know, somebody said, no, they're just providing nectar. You can go up to the flower and get more nectar, all right? No, this is something special. Now, I think probably is a queen pheromone mimic or something, but I actually, they act like it's a drug, okay? But they protect these things, and I have physically watched a caterpillar crawl down from the flower, crawl all the way down to, you know, it's like where the crotch of the leaf, or the flower stems meet, crawl back up to another flower. All the while being tended by the ants, all Twitter while they're doing it. So that's one way to avoid, you know, predation. Also gives us a hint to how these guilds form. But that's next. We're going to go back. That's called titillation. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's something else. No. All right. So this particular buckwheat supports 5 regular lichenids, right? Blue coppers, they love it. Find it almost every place where that plant is. Immaculate hair streak, green hair streaks, Phoenix Glaucus spinus. We have a butterfly which we have coined a term for. It's the Euphalotes badoides Eriogonum sphaerocephalum feeder. Is that a cop out or what?
Yes.
We don't know what it is. We just know it's not, you know, the heracleoides feeder, right? So we're really at the cutting edge here. That means that we don't know, and we're just trying to figure it out. We're not going to name them until we do. But all right, compositum supports another 5, right? Blue copper again, and you're going to find that blue coppers will use pretty much most of the buckwheats available to them in the habitat. It's not unusual to actually find sphaerocephalum and compositum in the same habitat. So those coppers are actually kind of forming a guild with a number of plants. But green hair streaks, I mean, if you go down to Schnebly, cool, excuse me, you guys been to Schnebly, right? And you've seen, you know, the green hair streaks. Well, they're flying around a bunch of these things as they're just coming out of the ground, right? And getting a head start on it. Another buckwheat blue, the Colombian blue, is kind of specially adapted to this one, but it's also adapted to the tall one, and that's like another story. The metal mark, again. Heracleoides, the blue copper.
So you have a couple more in there too.
What?
Well, the Acton blue and the Lupin blue.
Oh, that's right, I forgot those. No, I did mention them, I just didn't mention in passing. Oh, we don't know if the Acma is, and we know the lupins do. Right. I don't know. Heracleoides has a similar suite. Again, that one, you reared them on, you reared Acma on those for sure, you got the tails on them. So probably, you know, a lot of these things, we're talking about 5 to 6 butterfly species that are associated with these things. They can be individually in any given place, and they can be, you know, some of these occur, like elk-heiss rope, there's 3 buckwheat species, 2 of which are sharing 5 species. Although,
5 buckwheat species.
okay, 5, but only 2 of them share all the species of blue?
Probably 3 of them.
We're talking
Yeah, well, we've got northern buckwheat,
right.
compositum, we've got fall buckwheat,
Right.
we've got
Heracleoides.
we've got oh, what's the other one? It grows right before Heracleoides.
Gnome. It's just, gnome is another word for young. So, and then the tall buckwheat, you know, this thing that doesn't look like, you know, like a whole lot of things could make use of it, a whole lot of things make use of it, okay? And so, the interesting thing about all of the gnomes is that they have different bloom times, okay? So, for animals that specialize in feeding on the flowers, which a good many of these, not all of them, but a good many of them do, then adult flights have to be kind of synchronized to the blooming period, especially just the pre-bloom. So if adults are emerging just in pre-bloom, they're able to mate, they're able to lay eggs, and then they've got the life sequence of the blooms to feed their larvae. Right? This confounds all of that. So in some ways, this is a better food plant than almost all the others because it blooms for an enormous period of time. It does have, you know, a few limitations. Well, one being that actual biomass of the flowers is relatively small and forces you to do things that are unnatural. But this is always interesting to me because the ant, what they call myrmecophily, the ant-loving behavior of these larvae creates the opportunity to suggest a means by which this particular, these gills arose. If you're coming into the Kittitas Valley post-glacial, you just like the glaciers have melted and you're just pioneering this new habitat, but you're not the first one there. There's another butterfly there and there's a buckwheat. That butterfly's feeding on that buckwheat and it's attended by ants, okay? You are probably going to receive an advantage if you also are Myrmecophilus by joining that guild because it's already made for you. You don't have to evolve a relationship in sight, you know, with another group of ant species. It's already there. And if you're the third of a member, or the fourth, or the fifth, it's like happy days, you know. So, you know, that's a reinforcement. And reinforcement, speaking in terms of the advantage that you get from any given activity, reinforcement, you know, is a really powerful inducement. It's like selection at the highest levels, right? So, now, the interesting thing about this, oh yeah.
What are the ants doing for the caterpillar?
Well, they protect it. That's about the only thing. They keep it from actual predation by, you know, robber flies and anything else, ladybirds. And they also protect it from parasitoids, which I have personally seen. You know, a wasp or a fly will come down with the intent to lay an egg on the caterpillar, and these ants will defend it. So, yeah, that's pretty serious, you know, like if you're a caterpillar. which of course I'm not, and so I would be highly suspicious of anything I had to say about that. But it seems logical given the circumstances. But I'm surprised no one's asked me, like, how does a plant survive all of this? I think that's the most interesting part of this whole phenomenon, is that obviously this has been going on a pretty long time, and it's supported by a large number of genomes, and it must be beneficial in some kind of way, but it's hard for me to figure out, how. It's like maybe they just endure it, and they would have done maybe slightly better without it, but anyone who's been into habitats where genomes are present, you hardly, you don't think of them as all that poor sickly genome, it's like, that is a very healthy plant, and it's supporting like 6 species of butterflies. You can see bullet holes in the leaf. You guys know how lichenid larvae feed? Oh, I gotta do a presentation on that. Lichenid larvae, I showed you some back up here a ways, right? Lichenid larvae are kind of slug-like, okay?
Demonstration.
And what they do is they have an extensible head, and they bite through the peridiculum of the plant, the cuticle, so to speak, and they stick that head in, and it sticks way, way out, and then they eat a circle around as far as that head will extend. And then they pull their head out and move to the next place. So what's left is a white spot with a bullet mark in the middle of it. And so you always know when lichenids have been about. And that's the difference, one difference between them and metal marks, because metal marks will eat, they won't do that. They don't have that extensible neck for one thing, and they'll eat, they leave a funny looking pattern that's way different from the bullet hole. But when you look at genomes, always look to see, you might not always find a larva, and they're not only larvae that makes bullet holes for that matter, but once you see that, it's like, oh, that Pelham guy knew what he was talking about a little bit.
Hey, John, question about what it does for the plant. What about pollination?
Well,
with all those ants running around and everything.
I will tell you this. Every time I say that butterflies are pollinators, because they have to be, they spend a good part of their life getting nectar from plants, people say, well, they're not really important pollinators. And so I look at them and I say, okay, so, maybe not. I don't know. It seems to me that if you look at genomes long enough, they're attended by lots of things besides the butterflies, right? So,
well, I was thinking more of the ants. The butterfly larvae are causing all this running around, and the ants might be carrying pollen around. So maybe, it's a team effort.
What a devious mind you have. I hadn't thought of that actually. And ants would do sort of things like that. They move a lot.
They move a lot.
Yeah.
Ants run around a lot, but when I worked in pest control, ants are not considered to be carriers of germs and stuff like that because their skin is too smooth.
They clean themselves, right?
Yeah, so I don't think they would pollinate. But one thing we do know about caterpillar herbivores on plants is that the frass is a fertilizer.
Oh, who?
Yeah, that's manure. They're manuring the plants as they eat them.
It would take a lot of little blue. Hey, you know what? I'm not going to steal. Hey, and it's a matter of percentages too. Everything contributes. Well, that's better than what I had. I didn't have a clue at all. I already got more ideas than I had. Yeah.
For pollination, I think timing is pretty important too. Flowers have to be pollinated when they're fresh flower, right?
Right.
And that's when the butterflies lay their eggs, and the larvae are going to be eating those initial flowers, then they eat the fruits later. When they're attended by ants, it's when the larvae are a little bigger. And I think it's long after the period when the flowers can be pollinated.
Whoa, that's nice water. You could be right. I'm going to sit back and figure out. I've talked to pollinated people, and I don't know. I haven't. One thing I do know is that a major source of resources for adult butterflies is nectaring, and how much that I've found butterflies with milkweed pollinia stuck to their legs, and that's the thing that attaches, and butterflies pull it off, and it gives take it to another milkweed plant, pollinates, right? So I know that they must play some kind of a role, but to what degree?
Well, when the adult butterflies are laying eggs, that's probably during the pollination period.
so they can be pollinating and then.
Yeah, but the larvae, I don't think would be, or the ants tending them, I don't think would be involved in pollination.
In order for selection to operate, they would have, it doesn't matter where it operates, as long as at one portion in the life cycle it is beneficial. So that's reasonable. I don't know, but let's see. Oh, another thing, because all of these butterflies that use these gnomes are stacked pretty heavily on these plants. You know, it's like, well, you know, are they all going to be found at the same time? And absolutely not. In many places, like the northern buckwheat, you have, some of the larvae, like the blue copper, it diapauses as an egg. So when that egg hatches, it's got a whole life cycle to go through before it reaches the adult. In lupus blue, the half-grown larvae come out, so they've got a head start, and they only have to eat so much before they're able to pupate. The green hair streaks, they're almost like the blue in the sense that they're laying eggs in March, so they're getting a head start. And so the way that mormos work is like they almost have they diapause as eggs, Dave?
Which ones?
Mormo?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So in the spring, when they hatch, okay, they're on the same plant with eggs of the blue copper, right? And so the blue copper comes out and it starts munching down, and then it gets through the first instar, the second instar, and eventually gets to the pupa, and then it emerges. Meanwhile, the mormo is like, it's the middle of July. It's almost August, and then basically their flight period's at the end of August, beginning of September. So I don't know, but what they're actually employing a very clever strategy to avoid some kind of difficulty. Obviously, maybe they're avoiding the heat by not doing anything, sort of going into a semi-diapause. Since Dave, amongst the people in this room, have you found a mormo larva? Gary?
Me? No?
Dave is the only one I know in this room that's found one. I've looked for them for years and I've never found one. So whatever they're doing is really under the radar. And so that partitioning of these plants over time is pretty significant too. But it doesn't change the status of these plants as bona fide guild plants. But I saved the best for last. Now what time is it?
Quarter to.
Oh, I planned this decently. It's not too bad. Right, the Guild King. One of my favorite plants too. Can you guess? Come on, David.
Ceanothus.
You know it. These are just blues. Just butterflies. Oh, there's another butterfly. There's one too. That's a Columbia blue, and that's probably on northern buckwheat. That's his food plant. Lupin. You know how I know? Because it was on Butterflies of America website. Yeah?
Are there any buckwheats that do well on the west side?
Not that I know of. Only at high elevations, like Valifolium is in the Olympic Mountains, right? I don't know any others. In fact, I've known people to try to do them in rock gardens on the west side, and it's just like it's really hard.
Compositum's up by Crown Pass.
Who?
Compositum.
Who does it? Right.
And we're finding that some forms of umbellatum are fairly easy in the garden.
Really? To nurse?
Well, they bloom for us, and
Fun.
they don't do anything. They just come from high rainfall regions of the Rockies.
Yeah, there's a mormo. I don't know why it got the name Mormon Middle. I'm not sure. Ceanothus velutinus. This is a wonderful plant. It's got so much going for it. I would love it even if no butterflies ate it at all. You guys know what it smells like? It's a beautiful thing. Some people say that they think it stinks when it's in flower. I love that smell. And then I've heard it called mountain balm, and it's because it has kind of a aromatic, I feel like you should be able to rub it on your skin and feel better, But the best part is right there. Look at that. It makes me hungry. Those leaves and those blossoms. And you know what? I'm not alone. There's a lot of things that eat. And the thing that's interesting about is that they're all different kinds of things. I mean, this is one where I might even acknowledge, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now.
I've just got to point out crab spiders like it did.
Spiders?
You know, why?
Yeah, they do. You know why they like it? Because all the butterflies are coming and they're just waiting for them. You know, that's true. Well, it's crabs. Bazuma novadia, anything else besides that? That you know?
Oh, yeah. Mesumenops, Mecapisa, subphilodromains.
Oh, of course, yeah, that's right.
I think there are some aphids that are
Like spiders.
Now, the list of species for this plant, I had to actually change the collation on my page so that I could fit them all on one page. No, that's not entirely true. There's only 8, right? But they're cool. They're really cool. And the thing is, that's amazing about it is that one of them, the California tortoiseshell, virtually decimates these plants. And you think, man, well, that's it for them. And you come back a month later, everything's fine, right? So they're extremely resilient. They basically prosper in areas that got burned. I mean, this is a plant that is made for eastern Washington Cascades, right? Another example of that just makes me happy. This is Arinus pacubius. I can't remember the common name. Anybody remember the common name?
Pacubius.
Well, that's why I can't remember. Pacubius dusky, right?
Yeah.
So this is found on other Ceanothus species, but in Washington, it's like really tied to that one. John Bauman, I think, is found in association with another one in Ponderay in Spokane County, and I'm going to go over in May and help him find that out for sure, because it would be exceptional. And the fact that that's exceptional really supports the notion that this butterfly is tied to this plant very strongly. It's actually a really cool butterfly, even though it's basically brown with some gray and some other brown, but that's my kind of butterfly, all right? And it feeds on the leaves. It's a leaf feeder, so it ostensibly should tie the leaves together to form a retreat that would make it easier to find. But you found them, haven't you? You found eggs. You found larvae?
I don't think I found any larvae. I found 2 eggs and then reared them.
Right. It's hard because you know what? There's a buttload of leaves. So looking for it's hard. This is what its larvae look like. And if you guys remember the Purshia dusky wing had the little horny things on there. That's the same genus, and it's got the same little horny thing. I don't know. I think that's cool looking. Isn't that just cool looking? The only one that's better is Euphes vestris. And I almost threw that in there just because it's so cool looking, but I think that would have been a little bit too this.
Remind us, Euphes vestra, what English name is
Of which?
Euphes vestra.
Euphes vestris, the dung skipper. You're asking me the English name. That's not the way this works.
Well, someone else can answer the question.
All right. And then the pale, or is it the pale swallowtail?
Yeah.
Right. I like the scientific name a lot better. Urinated. It's like, urinated. But it's larvae, very much like the tiger swallowtail larvae, the eyes on it, and the osmenteria and everything. And it's not hard actually to find larvae on the Ceanothus because the larvae are so big that they eat enough of the plant you can kind of see where it's denuded. And it's just, it's tied to the plant. It's really tied to this plant. It will eat holodiscus and other plants, but a lot of places where on the east slope of the Cascades, like all through Reserve, Swakane, Chumstick, all the way up into Methow, I mean, that's this is bound to Ceanothus, the deer brush. And this is who? It's a hair streak. It was a giveaway. Right, the little hair streak sticking out of the banger. It's no.
Oh, shoot, I saw
Sepium. Sepium is the scientific name.
We saw this.
Hedgerow.
Hedgerow,
And this is another one of the hair streaks that feeds on leaves. And these can be found, I cheat, okay? Honestly, when I run into a Ceanothus velutinus and I'm seriously interested in finding larvae, I just beat it. Just like Michael Jackson. Beat it! Okay. That's enough. Don't get me started. And that's the larvae. Like I said, slug-like, the same modus operandi. I've never seen bullet marks in the Ceanothus leaf. You guys know the Ceanothus leaves are very tough. And so, you know, the things that use them must be doing so because they're really, really, really good. You know, things that eat the leaves instead of the flowers or the seeds are doing really well. Okay, and then the aforementioned California. By the way, this next year is going to be a big California torch show. Right? So
This year was, so why do you say next year is?
no, this year wasn't.
There were swarms of them.
Where?
In Mount St. Helens,
All right.
Oregon.
But Oregon, you know, is in Oregon. You know, I heard it. It's like, you know, no, I'm talking about when we go over Snoqualmie Pass, they're going to stop cars because the roads are so slippery. I mean, that's happened. Yeah. And that is, I mean, they're really cool, you know. And then if you get lucky and you find one of these slopes with Ceanothus on it, at that critical moment when they're all in pupae. And anybody were at Goldendale and I yelled at them at the morning cloak larvae, and they jerked.
Yes.
A whole mountainside of California Purshia pupae with wiggle. It is amazingly powerful. No, that's not true.
Now, why do you think that this is going to be a big deal?
Because we got more this year in places that, you know, we started seeing more of them. We had the big outbreaks, so like it's like whatever cycles are going on, this seems to be the cycle on up again. I'm guessing. If I'm wrong, then, you know, it won't be the first time. Well, it'll be close to the first. Yeah. But if I'm right, then you guys will think, wow, Pelham guy, he nailed the California tortoise show. So, now, California hair streaks also are on this plant, and brown elphins. Now, brown elphins and echo azures eat the flowers and the seeds. And the seed, I didn't get a good picture of the seed pods. They're hard. They're you know, really hard. And so the things that eat the seed pods, they actually have to burrow their heads into the seed pods, and they leave a little hole in the seed pod. And it's easier to see this later in the year when all the seed pods have opened up, but there's a few of those that got eaten, and they're like kind of husks with a hole in the side of them. But that's what these things do. And Lorquin's admiral. I mean, we're talking the Pacuvius dusky wing, pale swallowtail,
That's it, you said it.
California hair streak, the hedgerow hair streak, brown elfin, echo azure, Lorquin's admiral, California tortoiseshell. Holy cow! It is amazing, and they seem to be doing fine despite all that. So these are my impression of what, you know, gill plants are. Y'all got any questions? Because I'm done.
So could you?
I kind of gathered at the start that there's a local variation in the larval plants. What they eat here may be different what they eat on the East Coast.
Absolutely, yeah.
So all these lists in these books would be misleading somewhat.
The problem with almost any book that's a guide is that they're either building on information that wasn't built by them. I mean, they're reading other books and taking information, or they're interpreting it improperly. And I'm fully capable of doing both of those things myself. So I would say that what happens, you know, in the best case scenarios is that you're very, very detailed about in this place, and in this place, and in this place. So we talked about the Ozakia rosea. Is that right? Alexander left. Oh, well. That the Lotus type plant that's on the Kitsap Peninsula that association there is pretty much restricted to a very local area in western Washington. That group of butterflies that use that is actually pretty limited regionally. The Acmispon, the cowpie vetch on the other side, again, fairly restricted, you know, with that assemblage. It's more widely distributed elsewhere, but it doesn't have that assemblage. So really, I'm talking about that community in that region as well. It has to be a large enough region that it has, you know, something beyond what I said before. Okay, a considerable area. That's what I like. It has to be. It can't be just in the local area. It has to be a considerable area, like the Columbia Gorge. And it's interesting because that maintains on both sides of the gorge, all the way to like Goldendale region and then south in the Oregon side. You have none? What? You had your hand up?
Yeah.
Oh, you were just pointing at him.
I was just thinking in terms of thinking of the impact on the host plant, the damage to it and such. When you really look at these host plants, especially if you look like get into a Ceanothus and fresh bloom and then beat some branches into your net and then take a look at what you got. Yeah, there's butterfly larvae in there, but there's a lot of other stuff too. It's loaded with moth larvae, there's spiders, there's a whole bunch of other things that are probably chunking on that plant too. Not so much spiders, but
Hey, what's not to like? I mean, look at them. Does not look yummy? I mean, shiny leaves.
Turn back and show that first slide again with all the descriptors of a hill.
Okay, if he helps me.
There we go, thank you.
Yeah.
So one plant I thought you were going to talk about was lupins.
The whole problem with lupins is that individual species, because lupins are used
Gotcha.
broadly.
I also suspected no butterfly nectars on them.
Well, then they don't have to nectar on them or perch on them to be a guild food plant. But lupins, per se, are widely used, but a given species of lupin doesn't form this ecological relationship. Yeah.
This isn't really a guild question, but it's just about a plant. I read somewhere recently that the distribution of Flotes yuma in Washington State has not been looked into enough in the last few years.
It's been sampled for the last 3 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, do you know if the distribution of Phragmites australis is very well known in Washington State?
No, I think that's a real problem. I think that there's been a real problem amongst people identifying Phragmites as the native or the invasive. And in fact, they went into Salt Lake State Park and poisoned all the native Phragmites there, just about attempted to wipe out the Yuma skipper. Fortunately, they failed, and the last 2 summers we've been in there, and they're rebounding quite well. Actually, the bottleneck might have proved really useful. I think next year they're going to be like 100 billion. I didn't challenge you guys enough. There's more things you should have, or explained it clearly and you understand. Okay. All right.
Okay, thank you very much.